Hi, my name is Suhaim Parak, and I'm a developer advocate for academic research at Twitter. In this video, we'll take a look at how you can do academic research with the Twitter API v2. We'll first take a look at the different types of data that's available in the Twitter API. Then, we'll take a look at the code samples that are available for you to get started with the Twitter API in Python and R. Additionally, we'll also take a look at examples of research done with the Twitter API. And then finally, we'll point you to some resources and programs that are available for academics that use the Twitter API for research. My name is Suhaim Parak, and I'm a developer advocate for academic research at Twitter. So just for some background, developer advocates are folks that help other developers and researchers use different tech platforms. Obviously, I work at Twitter, so my role as a developer advocate for academic research is to help other researchers in their journey of doing research with Twitter data, right? So getting data from Twitter's APIs, from understanding how do you get the Twitter data, how do you process it, how do you store it at scale and things like that. So I work with universities across the world in helping them understand these tasks associated with doing research with Twitter data. I also work with developers and also like PhD students, master's students that are using Twitter API for their for the thesis or for as part of their PhD. In a given day, I work on things like blog posts or video content, showcasing people how do you get Twitter data in R or Python and so on. And then I also do things like live streams and office hours, things like that to help researchers in their journey of working with the Twitter API. Also, just by the way thing, I myself was a researcher with the Twitter API when I was doing my master's, which is why I ended up taking this job because it literally meant me working with the Twitter API. I was doing some research on the Indian elections in 2014. And at the time, obviously, we didn't have, or the Twitter API didn't have the ability to get historical data for free, which now is available, which is super exciting. So I do have a background in doing research with Twitter data myself before joining Twitter. So in terms of this session, what we'll do is we'll quickly talk about what the Twitter API is, and we'll particularly talk about the Twitter API v2, because the Twitter API v2 is a more newer API, obviously, and then more importantly, it is an API that has a lot of new functionality dedicated for researchers, right? Things like getting historical data, things like getting contextual information about tweets and so on. It's obviously built on a more modern framework. So we'll just be focusing on the Twitter API v2, and then we'll get into the specifics on what types of data is available with the Twitter API, right? Because a lot of times there are misconceptions about what does it mean to get data from the Twitter API? What type of data does Twitter make available through its API? So we'll take a look at a few specific examples. And then we'll look at a few case studies of how people use Twitter API. So we'll look at a few research use cases, but we'll also look at a couple of, or one developer use case on how Twitter is used for like crisis informatics and so on, right? And then we'll talk about the Twitter API access levels, because there are varying access levels in the Twitter API. Some are catered to academic researchers, some are catered to like a developer who may want to build like an app on Twitter and so on. So we'll look at specifically the academic research product track and what's available as part of it. And then we look at some resource and programs that we have, and then finally we'll walk through code samples. Now in the Slack channel, I had shared a PDF that actually outlines the resources and the sample apps. I'd highly encourage, as we go through those, that you try out those sample apps yourself, just so that you have an understanding of what it's like to interact with Twitter data and get a sense of the actual usage of Twitter API. Even if you don't have a developer account, some of these apps essentially will just ask you to like authenticate with Twitter. So you'll still be able to use those apps. I would highly encourage that you do follow along, simply because you'll get a good understanding of what does it actually mean to work with the Twitter API, right? So for starters, let's talk about what the Twitter API v2 is, right? So the Twitter API is essentially a programmatic way for developers and researchers to get Twitter data, right? So let's say if right now I go on Twitter and I log in hey, I'm teaching this tutorial at 6 in Duke University, and I make a tweet about that, right? This tweet will end up in some type of database at Twitter, right? And you as a researcher, you as a developer, if you want access to that Twitter data, like Twitter won't actually give you access to a database where they'll be like, hey, start writing SQL to get that data, because for a bunch of different reasons, right? Security, scalability, among other things, right? Instead, what Twitter does is it has this thing called the Twitter API. So this API is basically the interface that you use to connect or specify your data needs for getting Twitter data, right? So you're going to tell the Twitter API that, hey, Twitter API, I'm looking for tweets on a certain topic, right? I'm looking for tweets that contain the word, for example, COVID. I'm looking for tweets for a certain time period, because you may want to you may want to specify the exact time range of what you're looking, the time period that you're looking for, right? So let's say somebody wants to study the conversation around the original outbreak of COVID-19, right? So maybe early 2020, so they can actually specify the time period with the Twitter API, and the Twitter API then goes and gets those tweets, right? So the Twitter API, you can think of it as an interface which you work with, specify your needs, and the Twitter API also authenticates you, meaning if you are approved for like a developer account, only then will you be able to use the Twitter API and get data, right? So in case, let's say somebody might be a bad actor who may be trying to get Twitter data, they won't be able to, because they won't have a developer account, and thus they won't have a authentication token to connect to the Twitter API, right? So that's essentially what the API is. It gives you a programmatic way to specify your data needs based on the types of data that you're looking for, and then gets that data for you, right? A common example for people that may not be familiar with the concept of APIs, a lot of time professors give example of like going to a restaurant, right? So if you, let's say I want to get a nice cheeseburger, right? I can't just walk into a restaurant kitchen and start cooking the cheeseburger myself. In fact, I won't even have access to that kitchen, right? Instead, what I'll do is I'll go and sit at the table, and I'll have a server come up to me. They'll present me a menu. They'll say, OK, these are the things that we serve here. Off this, what do you want? I'll say, OK, I want cheeseburger. Then the server goes into the kitchen, gets your meal for you, and then presents the meal at your table, right? So that's the example that people often give for the Twitter API, or like for any API in general, is that API is what you interface with. You specify your needs, and then the API then goes in the backend of like databases and service systems, gets that data for you, and then presents it to you in a format that you can work with. So in case of Twitter or many modern APIs, you may have heard of the JSON format, and that's what the Twitter API returns the Twitter data in, right? So here's an example of what it means to get data from the Twitter API, right? So here on the top, you see that this is a tweet that you would see on Twitter.com. So if you were to log into your Twitter app or like your mobile app or the website, you see a tweet. And tweet generally has a few things, right? It has who tweeted that, right? It has things like the actual tweet text. What's the content of the tweet? If you see here, it also has things like when that tweet was created, how many people replied to the tweet, how many quote tweeted it, retweeted it, liked it, and so on, right? And these are different fields that are used for different use cases, right? So let's say somebody wants to study, let's say, memes in social media, right? So memes are generally like images that have some type of like text in them and some maybe some other objects in those images. So in that case, those researchers will be interested in getting all tweets that have certain images, right? Similarly, some people want to study the dissemination of information, so they may be interested in things like the retweet counts or like quote tweets, how many replies and things like that. So those are all the different fields that you can get from the Twitter API. So when somebody says, hey, I got data from Twitter API, this is what they're talking about, that they got some form of JSON representation of a tweet. And by default, the Twitter API v2 just gives you the ID and tweet text, right? So let's say if you just were to like today start using Twitter API as is, you'll get by default tweet ID and tweet text for, let's say you were searching for all tweets about COVID, or you were searching for all tweets from Suhaib Parak's Twitter handle, right? So you'll be able to get just tweet ID and tweet text. Then you can request additional information as well, and we'll take a look at what those additional fields are that you can get. But it's important to also mention at this point that when the Twitter API v2 only gives you public tweets, right? So any tweets that are deleted, you actually don't get those through the Twitter API. Any accounts that were suspended, you actually don't get those tweets. Similarly, any account that's protected, meaning so you guys know the lock mark next to some of these Twitter accounts, so you can't actually get those tweets as well, because those are not public. So the only data that's available from the Twitter API v2 is public Twitter data. So it's not like, it doesn't have inferred information like political affiliation, things like that. It just has what you see on Twitter. And the idea for that is to basically mimic the experience on twitter.com, the app, and then to honor the user's intent, right? So by that, I mean that if a person decides that, hey, my account was public, but I want to make it private, then it's like a shared responsibility model that me as a developer, then I will delete those tweets from my end because I want to honor the user's intent of making their account go private, right? So these were the default fields. Now, obviously, you can get additional fields as well. I think you can see it. Yeah. So additional fields include things like the source, meaning where was that tweet made from, right? Whether it was a cell phone or web application and so on. And some of these fields, like I said, are used for dedicated or like specific use cases. So somebody maybe want to study hashtag hijacking, right? So hashtag hijacking is like where people want to like trend a certain hashtag and like take over the conversation. So you may see that maybe in some cases, not all, but like some cases, they'll be all created tweets at the same time. So a researcher may be interested in this like created at timestamp to better understand where the bulk of the tweets, when were they made, right? You get additional things like the public metrics, so the retweet count, reply count, like count, quote count. So quote is basically when somebody does like like retweets, but with like additional text, and that's an example. And then you get additional things like language. So somebody wants to see what the language of the tweet was, and this is particularly used again for people that want to do like translation. So maybe there are tweets on a certain topic, but they also want those translated to let's say English, and then perform like text, like do pre-processing, cleaning up those the tweet text and so on. That's where they'll use things like the language. So again, these are not like, this is not an extensive list of all fields that's available, but I just wanted to like showcase a few additional examples of like when somebody says I got Twitter data, this is what they're referring to. The tweet ID, tweet text, who's the person who tweeted it, what's in their bio, how many followers do they have, and all of those things, right? You can also, in some cases, if there's like geo information associated with the tweet. So remember, not all tweets are geotagged, but let's say if I go on, make a tweet, and I actually tag my location in there, let's say that I'm tweeting from Seattle, Washington, you'll actually be able to get that information only if you're an academic researcher. So that's part of what we call like geotagged tweets, which is currently in the Twitter API v2 only open to researchers. It's not available to like all developers. So again, this is just an alternative representation of that same data from the Twitter API, but this time as like a data frame in R, just for those of you maybe using R. You'll see things like the tweet ID, tweet text, and so on. All of the stuff that you saw in JSON representation is just like a different way of showcasing that as data frames, particularly for people that use packages like R or like languages like R and Python, and they want to get those data frames in those languages, right? Now, I wanted to talk about a new feature as well that's part of the Twitter API v2, and these are called tweet annotations, right? So tweet annotations are basically like, for those of you who know topic modeling or named entity recognition in text, this is basically topic modeling and named entity recognition done by Twitter, like as a first-party thing done by Twitter for developers and researchers, right? So those of you that use Twitter, if you are familiar with the concept of topics, you'd see that a tweet may be about like NBA basketball, or tweet about the Indian cricket team, or it can be any topic like that. And so Twitter API or Twitter will determine based on like their own like machine learning and identify what that tweet is contextually about, and it'll give you that information in your tweet payload. So in your tweet response, if a tweet has certain named entity recognition, named entities in them, so let's say a tweet mentions LeBron James, it'll actually pull that as being a named entity LeBron James. Similarly, topics, right? So if a tweet is about the Golden State Warriors, there'll be a topic annotated as such, right? So currently, the list of domains that are included or supported include things like politicians, right? So if a tweet was, let's say, about a politician, for example, Joe Biden, those tweets will be annotated as such. So there are two different or more common use cases for using annotations, right? One is to better understand what a majority of the tweets are about, right? So an example that we look at later on is we'll go through our own home timelines, meaning the timeline that Twitter decided to show us. And based on that, we'll use context annotations to identify which ones of these are on a certain topic. So how many tweets about a certain topic, and then we look at the breakdown that way. So that's one use case. The other use case is for searching for tweets about those topics, right? So let's say an example is if I wanted to get all tweets about COVID, right? For let's say the last 1 month. Just think about my search query of and all the different like keywords that I'll have to use, right? I could use COVID-19, hashtag COVID-19, COVID-19, coronavirus, and so on. So you can imagine my search query can be like fairly long. And then it may also include additional things that may not be, like that may be about COVID, but they don't have the word COVID in them, right? So example is things like hashtag stay home, stay safe, right? This was like during the early outbreak, this was like a hashtag that people were using, or like self-quarantine, things like that, or Moderna vaccine, Pfizer, whatever. So these terms that are contextually about COVID, but they don't necessarily have the word COVID in them, you can actually, you'll be able to like search for those using these context annotations. And so here's an example again. So if this tweet says rain, storm, sun, what's happening with the weather, Twitter picks it up as being a tweet about the weather and also about science. And so what next time you can do is if you want to search for all tweets about the topic weather, right, you could actually use this key value pair. So you see 66 dot whatever this is, and then you can use that in your search query instead of like building up like a bigger search query with like different combinations and so on. Now, obviously, hopefully you guys will have questions about, hey, like how are these annotations built? Or how reliable are they, or what languages are supported? Does it support like all languages or only some? So we actually have all of these questions answered as FAQs on developer.twitter.com. It's also one of the links that I had included in the resources in the Slack channel. So definitely check it out for people that may have questions around like, hey, I want to know more about these annotations. I want to see how those, which languages are supported and so on. You can get answers to those questions in that documentation. So here's an example. There's a sample app that I pointed to in the resources as well. So if you look at the sample app section, there's a link for tweet entity extractor. So the way that works is that you put in any tweet of your choice, right? And for that tweet, it will tell you what are the different entities that are present in it, and then you can basically use that to search the Twitter API. Right? So in this case, the example that you're seeing, this is for a specific cryptocurrency. So if you were to like put that tweet in, so feel free to try it out. Just go to the tweet entity extractor, put in like a tweet of you guys' choice, and just like see what named entities or what topics are present. Again, a few common ones that people use are like politicians and political races, simply because they want to get like a variety of keywords included in their search for the Twitter API. So next thing that we can take a look at is the different data delivery options, right? So by data delivery options, I mean different mechanisms or different ways in which you can get data from the Twitter API, right? So the first one is what we call historical endpoints, right? So historical Twitter data, and there are a few different options. So let's say if you're a developer, you want to search for tweets from the last 7 days, you can use what's called the recent search functionality. So it'll give you, so any event that happened in the last 7 days, you want to go and get tweets about it, you can actually use the recent. So the way that the recent search or any search endpoints work is that you have few components to it. So you have the most important component, which is your query. And your query is where you'll specify what type of data you're looking for. So that's where you'll specify, hey, I'm looking for tweets from a certain account. I'm looking for tweets that contain certain keywords. I'm looking for tweets that may have images, or all of these different things, like different combinations you can use with operators, and then specify your data needs, right? And again, the recent search only goes back 7 days, but the more important one, as we look at in the examples as well, is the full archive search. So full archive search basically lets you search the entire archive of public tweets, right? So right from the very first tweet ever on the Twitter platform, all the way to, let's say, somebody tweeted like a second ago, for example, right? You're able to search between that entire time period and get the Twitter data that you need. This is particularly powerful for researchers. Again, like I mentioned, when I was doing my master's, this was a paid option, so it was not an option for me. I couldn't afford it at the time. But now it's available for researchers for free to be able to go back and get that data from the full archive. And this is also particularly important for people that want to study historical events, right? So let's say a researcher wants to study the conversation on Twitter about Hurricane Harvey, for example. This is an event that happened in the past, so you can actually go and specify your time range that, hey, I want all tweets about like SOS Harvey or something like that, and then you can specify your time period and you can get the tweets on that topic, right? So these are what we call examples of like historical endpoints where you can go back in time, 7 days or the full archive depending on your access level, and get the data that you need. When you get data from these historical endpoints, this is what we saw as the JSON representation. That's the data that you get back, right? But we also have what's called the counts functionality, right? So the counts functionality is basically people want to study, let's say, trends. So how many tweets about, let's say, hashtag 6, for example, or 6/2022. In the last 7 days, instead of getting the actual tweets for that query, you can actually get the volume. So people that are into like visualization use cases or people that want to look at trends and patterns, they can actually use the counts functionality to do that, right? So I actually have an example here. So this is what an example of that counts will look like, right? Instead of getting the actual raw JSON, you'll actually get the volume. So in this case, per day for the last 7 days, how many, or whatever, last few days, how many tweets that contain the word COVID. So this is for people that want to build like visualizations and trends type of use cases, right? So that's an example of another example of historical data. Then the other common or popular data delivery option is what we call real-time solutions, right? So real-time solutions are those where you can create a connection stream to the Twitter API, and then you can start getting tweets on a certain topic in real time, right? Again, this is particularly used for use cases like crisis informatics. So let's say there's a breaking event, breaking news type of situation. You can actually, and you want to like listen for tweets in real time as people are tweeting about it. Maybe for like helping people and so on, you can actually listen for that connection and you can start streaming those tweets, right? So it would look something like this, where let's say this is a sample connection to the sample stream, and as people are tweeting, you're collecting tweets on your side, and then you can filter out those tweets based on maybe you're looking for tweets only in a certain language. Maybe you're looking for tweets that are like original tweets, meaning it's not a retweet, because if it's a retweet, you'll see that the tweet text always has an RT before it. So it says RT followed by something that generally indicates that it's a retweet. So you can actually stream for these this type of data, and you'll be able to then filter out based on any condition. You can even do like keyword tracking. So you can say, hey, I'm only looking for tweets in real time that contain a certain keyword, or they're only from a certain person's account, and things like that. You can use the filtering solution for that. And we have a developer use case that we'll take a look at as well. And then for sake of time, I'll skip through some of these, but essentially some other data delivery options include, one of the common ones is a tweet timelines. So you can either get a user's entire tweet timeline, so it'll give you the 3,200 most recent tweets. So let's say you decide, hey, I want to get all tweets from Suhaim Parak's account. So my account, you can actually get 3,200 latest tweets. And again, these are used for use cases like studying, maybe somebody wants to study toxicity in a user's timeline, or mentions, like, when somebody does @ or somebody replies to somebody. Those are what we call mentions. And so you can also get a mentions timeline as well. So let's say a certain account, what are the common mentions that this person has or replies, and then you can get that from the Twitter API. You can study things like maybe somebody wants to study hate speech, or somebody wants to study the type of content that a person spreads. Maybe somebody retweets a lot and somebody only tweets a few times. All of those types of behavior you can study using the tweet timelines endpoint. So there are three options. One is the user tweets, which gives you all the tweets that a person made, 3,200 recent ones. The other one is mentions, where somebody was mentioned. And the third one is actually a newer one and really important one. It's the home timeline. So these are the tweets that Twitter decided to show you, right? So if you were to go on Twitter today, you open the app or the website, you'll see like your home timeline. That's also programmatically available through the API for people that want to study, okay, what are the different topics that are present in my timeline? I want to see those. And we'll actually, I have a demo app for that will showcase how you can, how the home timeline can be used. And the last one is like particularly important for academic researchers. It's called the batch compliance solution. And the way that it works is that, let's say you're a researcher, you have, I don't know, 50 million tweets on a certain topic that you collected over a period of time. And you want to see what's the current status of my tweets. Like, of these, which ones are like deleted, which ones are suspended accounts, which ones are accounts that went private, and so on. You can actually batch upload these millions of tweet IDs with like one API call. So you can just make one request, you can create a compliance job, and then you upload those tweet IDs, and then Twitter in response will tell you that, okay, of the 50 million that you uploaded, these many are deleted. These many are from accounts that are now suspended, or these many are from protected accounts, and then you can make those adjustments on your site. So these are examples of data delivery options that are available from the Twitter API. So you can see the primary 3-4 common ones are historical ones where you go back in time, streaming ones where you're listening for real-time events, and then there's the timeline type of thing where you can actually go through personal time. Obviously, there are other things as well, like you guys know the follower graph thing. So like who follows whom, or people that retweeted a certain tweet, you can get those types of lookup as well from the Twitter API. So let's take a look at a few examples of how developers and researchers use the Twitter API, right? And these are actually use cases that are listed on developer.twitter.com. So actually, before that, let me quickly show you the website, so just so that you're like familiar with where to look for information. So anything that's Twitter API related, you can actually go to developer.twitter.com. This is like, I would probably even like bookmark it. And on developer.twitter.com, you'll see things like documentation, use cases, tools and libraries and things like that, where you can find all sorts of resources of using the Twitter API, right? And in this, for researchers particularly, in the use cases section, if you go to do research, you'll see that it outlines a bunch of different things, right? It outlines how other people are using the Twitter API, right? So here we have a few examples, one from PenMed, one from the Hate Lab at Cardiff University, and another one from UC Davis. But essentially, if you're interested in learning more about like how people are using Twitter API for research, you can actually go in and you can like figure what they were trying to do, what solutions that they use, what Twitter API, which endpoints do they use in the Twitter API, what were their results, and so on. So I would highly recommend for those of you that are interested in doing research with Twitter API in the future to definitely check out developer.twitter.com, and particularly this do research page, because that outlines a bunch of, so actually it outlines additional to that, you can also get additional information about like the academic research track, what's included and so on. It has a dedicated page with like resources that you may be interested in. So let's say you at some point decide, okay, now I want to start working with the Twitter API in like more details. You can actually go in and start to look at what SDKs, what libraries, what tutorials are available to you as a researcher. So I just wanted to showcase those few resources that all of you should ideally bookmark. So a few examples of research that are that's done with the Twitter API. One is misinformation. That's a common one that people use the Twitter API to study how misinformation spreads and what are ways that they can tackle misinformation in social media. And they obviously use Twitter as an example because Twitter is one of the APIs that makes that information available through, or that has a public API for researchers to use, right? Another common one that we've seen people use the Twitter API for is the coronavirus, the study COVID, and we actually had launched a dedicated like a data delivery option for researchers only. It was an invite only. This was, I think, last year, where if you're a researcher, you could apply for access. And you would get a dedicated, like a stream of all tweets about COVID, right? And you're talking about like millions and millions of tweets per day. So, and this actually used the tweet annotations that we spoke about, where any tweet that was contextually about COVID, those were piped through a filtering solution, and then researchers would then connect to that stream, collect those tweets. Some of them built like dashboards to understand conversations about outbreak. Some of them used it for studying public perception around like masking and so on and so forth. So that was another example that people use the Twitter API for, is to study the coronavirus. And then obviously a few additional examples include polarization, social movement, and so on, right? So the first one that's listed on our website is how the Penn Medicine Center for Digital Health, they were actually using the Twitter API to understand how to frame public health messaging and also combat misinformation about COVID. So they actually end up using the Twitter API for that. You can find details of their use case on developer.twitter.com, right? Similarly, we have other example of the hate lab at Cardiff University. And they essentially built these techniques for, or like they basically use machine learning to classify toxic speech on Twitter. And they, so their approach can also, you can find on developer.twitter.com on how they used Twitter data to classify hate speech as well. And then the last one is this example of UC Davis, where the researchers there are using Twitter data to understand the conversation around climate change. This one's also listed on our website, right? So these were a few use cases of research. I have one use case around actual developer use case as well, of how developers use Twitter API in crisis management type situations, right? And this case study is actually from India, where there is a second wave of COVID, and obviously a more populous country, so their hospital systems were overwhelmed, meaning like somebody wants to get admitted to a hospital, couldn't find admission into a hospital, right? And so they were taking to social media to make these requests that, hey, I know somebody who got COVID and I'm trying to get them admitted to a hospital, or I need oxygen administered to them and so on. Can you help me? And so they were making these requests on Twitter. And then, so these would be like examples of what those tweets would look like, right? Somebody's like, hey, oxygen level is this. I need urgent access to like a ventilator bed and so on. And people were using Twitter to make these requests. And so what developers did is they built apps that would use the Twitter API to collect these tweets in real time, right? And make it easy for doctors and volunteers on the ground to go through these requests and connect these people with doctors on the ground, right? So the way that worked, this is an example of the COVID.Army app. This is one of the many apps that that developers built at the time. And the way that worked was they used the Twitter API, right? So they're getting all tweets again. They're using the COVID-19 tweet annotation to get tweets about COVID, and they're filtering it by cities, right? So somebody's saying, okay, give me all tweets in Mumbai about that people are requesting, let's say, ICU bed or something, so on. And then if you see here on the top, there's a volunteer login. So that's where, like, let's say I'm a doctor in Mumbai or in New Delhi, and I have access to a network of hospitals. Then I would go in and I can actually call these people, because people are leaving their phone numbers, and then they would be like, hey, do you still need help with admission in a hospital, or do you still need access to like a certain medicine, so on? And if they said, okay, we need help, then they would connect them with a local doctor, local hospital that would have availability. And that's how they were using the Twitter API for this type of like crisis management situation, right? So this is, again, just like one such app. There are countless other apps like this that people built using on top of the Twitter API for this crisis situation, right? So let's quickly talk about the access levels that are part of the Twitter API, right? So Twitter API v2 currently has 3 access levels. The first one is what's called essential access. And essential access is basically also, like, you can also think of it as like instant access. So if you wanted to just try out the Twitter API for like an assignment in your class, or if you want to just like get a sense of, hey, I want to collect few tweets just to understand, maybe build like a visualization, something like that, something like a lightweight type of use case, you can actually sign up for the essential access by going to t.co/signup. So you just, in your browser, you can just type t.co/signup, and that will take you to the essential access sign up. And the good thing about this access level is that it is instant access, meaning you don't have to wait for a use case review. So you just fill in some information and you instantly get access to the Twitter API. Now, obviously, because you're not going through a use case review, it's much more limited than some of the other offerings, like the academic one and the elevated access. But it's still sufficient for like a classroom project, an assignment, or something like that that you may be working on. And you can get up to 500,000 tweets per month. Obviously, the biggest caveat is that you don't get access to the full archive search. The full archive search in V2 is only reserved right now, as of now, only for the academic researchers. So in this level, you can still get tweets, but it'll be from the last 7 days only, right? Then there's what we call the elevated access. And now you use the Twitter API essential access. You're like, hey, this looks good. I already know how to work with it in R or Python or any language of my choice. And I really want to like get additional data, like more data for a certain topic, building an app or whatever it might be. You can then apply for elevated access. And in this case, the difference will be you'll get 2 million tweets per month, and you'll also have to submit a use case review. So you apply for a developer account, Twitter, or somebody at Twitter reviews that, and once you're approved, you're able to connect to the Twitter API using your keys and tokens. And then finally, the academic research product track, which is obviously the one that most of you might be interested in. It gives you access to the full archive of public tweets. So any tweet that was made that's public, right from the very first tweet on the platform up until now, you basically have access to those. You can search for those and get those using this API. You also get up to 10 million tweets per month, which is obviously significantly more than the essential and the elevated access levels. You also have more precise filtering capabilities, meaning you can you can get specific in terms of the data that you need, right? So you can say, I'm looking for all, let's say, tweets that were geotagged in, let's say, Seattle, Washington, right? And it'll only give you those tweets that are from that area, right? So there are these types of like precise filtering capabilities that are available only to academic researchers. So right now, undergrads unfortunately don't qualify for the for the academic track. So this is right now open to master's students, PhD, postdoc, faculty. So also people that work in like a research lab, maybe like you're like a research engineer and so on, you qualify as well. And obviously you need to have a specific like use case in mind, and that use case has to be for non-commercial purposes, meaning you're not making money off of that, right? So in terms of, so these are all, so far things that we saw are all API related, right? Access levels, what types of APIs available, and so on. For researchers, we also have specific programs as well, right? So a few things that we have for, again, the first one is the documentation that outlines all the different things that are part of the Twitter API, where you can get started and get information on the different endpoints and so on. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight was this course that we have on getting started with Twitter API for academic research. And this course, I'll actually walk you through this real quick, because this is particularly important for those of you maybe over the summer you're like, hey, I want to like really understand how do I work with the Twitter API. It's available on github.com/twitterdev. I also included this in our resources PDF. But essentially, this is a self-paced course that walks you through somebody who doesn't know anything about the Twitter API, all the way to applying for access, from writing code in R or Python and getting Twitter data, right? So it has these 8 different modules. First one, where you learn what the Twitter API is. You learn how to identify which access level to apply for. Module 3 has what resources to request, meaning like if you want timelines related data, what do you do? If you want to search for tweets, which one to use, so on. So I would highly recommend that you try this course. This was actually requested to us by a lot of professors who were teaching a class, let's say on like text mining or something, where they're like, hey, I don't want to spend too much time teaching people how to work with the API. My students should already know this. So now they use this course as a prerequisite type of module that they plug into their in their course, and then their students, by the time they're done with this course, they're ready to start using the they're ready to start using the Twitter API. So those are some of the resources. We also have the office hours, where you can like sign up. If you were using Twitter API, you got stuck, you need help, you can actually sign up for office hours, and you can get one-on-one help in debugging your code and so on, right? And so now we'll actually take a look at a few sample apps that we have. The first one that we'll start with is the tweet downloader, right? And I'll zoom in a little bit. But before looking at the tweet downloader, let's understand how do you get your keys and tokens, right? So first thing is obviously you apply for your developer access. Once you have your developer account approved, if you go to here, developer.twitter.com/portal, you will see that you have this like dashboard view. And in my case, it gives me two types of projects, right? One is elevated access because I have elevated access, and then it also gives me academic access because I'd applied for academic approval access as well. Now each project, right, can have an app associated with it. So I just want to clarify what an app is, because sometimes when I say app, people think that I'm talking about like an iPhone app or like an Android app. In the context of Twitter API, an app is simply a placeholder to hold your keys and tokens, right? Because anytime you make a request to the Twitter API, Twitter will try to see where this request is coming from, right? Who's making this request? And they'll look at the access that, okay, firstly, is this person authorized to use the Twitter API? If they are, which level are they able? Are they able to get the full archive search, or are they only able to get the last 7 days, right? So in order to do that, Twitter uses what's called the bearer token, right? So if I go here in my app here, there's this keys and tokens thing. It shows me a few things. It tells me there's I'll zoom in a little bit, a consumer key, and it has this bearer token, right? So this bearer token is basically your unique identifier of using your project to get tweets for your project, right? So it's your unique key, so do not share it with other people. Obviously, do not check it in on like GitHub or something, because if somebody else has access to it, they'll start making those API calls on your behalf. So this is actually, the app is basically just a placeholder for those keys and tokens that keeps your keys and tokens safe for you. So in order to use any, whether you're using R, whether you're using Python, any library that you're using to connect to the Twitter API, you will need to have a bearer token. And so in my case, I already have my bearer token, so I'll just skip that step. But essentially, once you have your bearer token, you can start using different tools and different libraries. One of the tools that we have for researchers is what's called the tweet downloader. This one was particularly requested to us by social scientists. They're like, hey, we don't want to spend a lot of time connecting to Twitter API in like Python, R, or some of the other languages. We just want the Twitter data in a format that works for us, like CSV or JSON, and then we'll take it from there. We want to just like import it in a data frame or whatever they want to do with it. So they're like, can you just give us a tool that we can just download tweets from, right? So which is why we built this tool called the tweet downloader. The way that works is that first things first, so this only works with academic research access, by the way. So if you don't have academic research access, it won't work. First thing is that it's going to ask you for like a bearer token. I just plugged in mine. Just also, just a by the way thing, bearer token looks something like this, right? So I'll zoom in a little bit. Oops. Starts with like these, like a few capital A's. And so this is basically what I got from my developer portal. And if I put it in here, I do next. So if it's a valid token, it'll let me go to the next step. Let's say if it wasn't a valid token, so let's say if I were to use, let's say, some gibberish, it won't let me like go there. So it has to be a valid token. Once it validates it, I can actually create a download, right? And the download, in the download, I can specify a few different things, right? I can specify my query. So as I had mentioned, that the query is probably the most important aspect of using the Twitter API. So let's say if I say I want to get all tweets that contain the word COVID, right? And then you can also specify the time period. So let's say in my case, let's select I want all tweets from the month of May, right? So I can actually do. So I'm saying now give me all tweets for the month of May that contain the word COVID, right? And I can specify the export format, whether I want CSV, JSON. If I click continue, it'll actually count the tweets for me that are available for that meet this criteria, right? So it's telling me that there are about 17 million tweets that contain the word COVID for this time period, right? Obviously, I'm not going to download it because my tweet cap is 10 million, but this is just to showcase what's possible, right? So if I want to like further refine my search queries, there are other like filters that I can add here as well. So I can say that I want tweets that isn't a retweet, right? So it automatically like filled the query for me. So now if I click continue, it'll only give me tweets that contain the word COVID, but they're not retweets. So this obviously means that it should be drastically reduced. So if you can see here now, it's much lesser. It's like about 5 million tweets. There are other operators that you can use as well to further refine. So let's say you want all tweets that have images in them, right? So it already added has images in it. And then if I click continue, now it's going to further refine it to like 600,000. So this is just like, again, I'm just using this as a example to showcase how you can further refine your search queries. But you can, this is just keyword. You can also do additional things like if you want COVID or coronavirus, for example, right? So you can add this or operator, or you can add it here as well. So it basically makes it super easy for you to get your Twitter data without having to write any like extra code in Python or R. And then once you download it as JSON or CSV, you can start using those in a library of your choice, right? So for those of you who already have access to the academic track, maybe now or like afterwards in the afternoon, definitely try it out and just to get a sense of how to use this tool, and then you'll be able to get the data that you need, right? So let's also take a look at a few more sample apps before we open up for questions. One of them is this API Playground. Again, this was also linked to in the resources. So right now, if you want to follow along, you can try it as well. But this is just like you can think of it as like a sandbox environment, or like it's literally a playground where if you want to explore the Twitter API without signing up for a developer account, let's say you applied for access, but you're waiting for your developer account to be approved, you can use this playground to see what it's like to get Twitter data, right? So in my case, in this example, let's look at how search would work, right? I'll zoom in a little bit. So if I put in search, I can specify a query. So I can do, let's say I want all tweets from the Twitter dev account, which is the Twitter dev platform's official account. If I were to run here, it should actually get me some tweets back, right? So it's bringing a tweet ID and tweet text by default from this account. And it got me it got me all the tweets from the last 7 days. So in the last 7 days, there were 4 tweets from this account, which is why you only see 4 tweets here, right? Then you can also specify things like additional fields. So remember we mentioned that from the Twitter API, you can also get context annotations. You can also get the language of the tweet, when that tweet was created. All of those you can actually specify in these tweet fields. So in this case, I'm saying, OK, in addition to the tweet ID, tweet text for all of these tweets, give me when the tweet was created at, so the timestamp. Also give me the language of the tweet. Also give me, I don't know, let's do context annotations, right? Which annotations are present in these tweets. Now if I were to run this, you'll see that additional fields will be returned here. So it says that the language of this tweet was English, the context annotation. So this tweet mentions that there's a developer conference that will be held in San Francisco. So it identified the named entity as San Francisco in it. And social media terms, so on. So this is, again, an app that for those of you who don't have access to a developer account but want to just try out the API, you can check it out using this API Playground. Few additional sample apps that, again, just for some inspiration for you to try out. This is a tweet counts demo. And the way that works is you basically put in any search term. And it'll give you the volume of it, right? So first, it's asking me to authenticate because it doesn't use keys and tokens. So let's say I want all tweets that contain the word COVID in them. If I hit this, it'll give me instead of giving me the actual tweet volume, or sorry, the tweets, it'll give me a volume of so in the last 7 days, it says there were about 4 million tweets that contain the word COVID, and gives you like a visualization of that, right? So that's another app for those of you that are interested before actually starting using the API. You want to first get a sense of how many tweets are available for a certain topic and what are the trends and patterns. Well, you can actually use that as well. This was the tweet annotation extractor that we'd taken a look at, but I can showcase an example again. So in this case, if I were to use this tweet here, it'll tell me, actually, let's use, yeah, this tweet's fine. if I plug this in here, it's going to tell me what are the annotations that are present in this tweet. So in this tweet, there's technology, social media, Twitter. So essentially identifies these entities for you from the tweet. And then, so two more examples, and then I'll show you a couple short example in Python and one in R, and then we'll open up for questions. Is this Home Timeline Explorer? So this is the one that I was talking about that uses your home time, meaning the tweets that Twitter decided to show you, right? And it's gonna, you pull out those context annotations and count those for you. So it's gonna tell you how many tweets on a certain topics are present in my home timeline. So when I go here in home, this is what I call my home timeline, this different tweets that I see here. And this app will essentially pull out those tweet annotations. So I'll actually go and authorize this app. And you can try it along with me if you want to just see what are the different annotations that are present in you guys' Twitter timelines as well. But it'll take a couple of seconds. Yeah, so now it tells me that there are like, most of my tweets are about Twitter, about 355 times. And it'll give you like a sample, one example of those tweets as well, just so that you like get a sense of which are the common topics that are appearing in my home timeline. Now to use the Twitter API in R, you actually have to use this package called Academic Twitter. This is a package also just a shout out to Chris and Justin who actually put together this package. It's not built by Twitter, it's built by Chris and Justin, and the way that it works is that in the Academic Twitter package, you put in your bearer token, and then you use, they have a few functions that you can specify your search requirements and then start using, right? So first thing is you need to have that package installed. Once you have that package installed, I have a code snippet here. You'll first import it. So the first step is to make sure that you get your bearer tokens through your developer portal, right? Once you have your bearer token, you install the library, you import it, and then you essentially, you just use the methods that they have available, right? So in this example, the method is get all tweets. And this get all tweets takes in a few different things, right? First is it takes in the query, meaning where you specify what data you're looking for in R. It takes in the start tweets, end tweets. So this is the time period for which you want the tweets. And then you pass it the bearer token. So if I were to just run, actually, let's change this to Twitter dev. If I were to run this, this will essentially give me tweets from this time period from this account, right? And again, you'll see things like the language, conversation ID. So this conversation ID, by the way, is super powerful because conversation ID lets you get all the replies to a tweet. So let's say I have one tweet, but it has a bunch of follow-up conversation going on. If you have used Twitter API in the past, the old one, this used to be like a hassle to like build your own conversation thread. You use what's called in reply to status ID. You append it. You have to do like a lot of like custom combination of different things. But now with the conversation ID, you can essentially, so let's say I want all replies to, let's go to the Twitter dev account here. If I want, let's say this one. Okay, this has the replies. Right, so I can just use this tweet ID, and here I can, instead of doing from Twitter dev, I can just do conversation ID. And I can specify that, and it will give me all the replies to that. Obviously, I'll have to remove the start and end, but that's how you get all the replies to a tweet as well. So that's a more newer functionality that's available in Twitter API v2. And then obviously a few additional fields like the context annotations, public metrics, how many retweets and how many replies and so on, that's available from this package as well. So this is actually a really powerful package. We actually have, if you, the course that I'd mentioned actually has a dedicated module on this, on how do you install the Academic Twitter package, and how do you search for tweets from the last 7 days and store it in like JSON and so on. So after this workshop, actually as a group exercise, this might be a good one to try out, where we go through these different functions, put it in R or Python, whichever one you prefer, and then we work with those to get Twitter data and get a sense of it. And then the last example before we open up for Q&A is of working with the Twitter API in Python, right? So in Python, again, you have few different libraries. You have one that's called tweepy. You may have heard of that one. I don't know if it's pronounced tweepy or tweepy or but that one is actually one of the most popular ones that supports v2. That's my personal favorite because it has, it lets you get more than like 100 tweets at a time by using what's called pagination. Because remember, when you use the Twitter API, by default, you get up to, for the full archive storage, you get up to 500 tweets in a request, right? But let's say I'm interested in getting like 10,000 tweets that contain the word COVID, right? This Tweepy package actually has this functionality called paginator, where you can specify the limit. So in this case, I'm saying I want 1,000 tweets. So if I were to, like, for example, run this, hopefully it should give me print 1,000 of these tweet IDs, right? Whereas in like other libraries, if you want to get more than 500 tweets, you have to like use what's called the next token appended back and so on. So again, the instructions for these are available on GitHub. And as like I said, for a group exercise, we can actually walk through these modules here. That will walk us through. So in this one, if you see, there are code samples in Python. All that you have to do is just like copy paste those, put in your own bearer token, and those will start working. But the two key examples that I wanted to showcase, again, these are not just of the Twitter API, but other services as well, is this example is of this AWS service called Translate. And again, these are just purely for inspiration purposes, just to showcase what's possible. This is I use this service called AWS Comprehend, and AWS Comprehend actually has a translate mechanism which lets you specify any input text, a source language, and the target language. So target language is basically the one that you want to translate it to. In this example, what I'm doing is I'm getting tweets that are in the Hindi language from this is my test account. And from that, I'm simply passing the tweets that are in the Hindi language to this method here, translate. And I'm asking them to translate it from Hindi to English, right? So if I were to run this, you'll actually see that it actually showcases the original text, which is, this is Hindi script that says the weather is really good, translates to today's weather, which is like pretty accurate. And then the source language is Hindi, and the target language is English. So again, these are examples just to showcase like a world beyond the Twitter API. So once you get data from the Twitter API, what are some additional things that you could do with it? And then the last example I had is of this service called Perspective. So Perspective is an API that's built by this team, Jigsaw, at Google. It's part of Google. And what they do is they have built these machine learning models that detect toxicity in any text, right? So it doesn't have to be tweets. It can be like you give it any text, it will identify a few things, right? It identifies things like insults. It does toxicity, among few other things. Actually, in the how it works, they actually explain what are the different things that they have. They have detection of insult, threat, profanity, and so on. And this is an API, right? So obviously, this is not owned by Twitter. It's a separate company. The way that works is just like how you apply for a developer account for Twitter, you apply for a Perspective developer account. Once your account is approved, you can get your API key that you can then start using to use in like Python or whatever language you use, right? So in the sample that I have, what I'm doing is I have I have a sample method that I put together for this Perspective API, right? And all that it does is it takes input as a text, right? This is my own API key, so in your case, you will be replacing it with your own API key. And it's simply saying that for this text, I want you to detect toxicity, right? So if somebody wanted, let's say if you also wanted to get insult, you would do like something like this, insult. And so it will also see if there's like any like insults and something like that in it, right? So in this case, I just want to use toxicity, and it'll just give me the response back. And so now in this example, what I'm doing is I'm initializing a client for Tweepy, and I'm saying that for this user, Twitter dev, give me their mentions, right? So anytime somebody does @Twitter dev, those would count as mentions. And I'm just saying that for the 25 most recent mentions, give me the language, give me the tweet ID and the tweet text, and then I'm taking the tweet text and the language, and I'm passing it to this analyze method, right? And this analyze method, if it has any toxicity score, it'll give me that toxicity score. So if I were to run this, if you see here for each tweet, it's trying to get like a toxicity score. So in this case, for example, 0.00, basically like there's thankfully it's not a toxic tweet. But this way it'll identify the percentage. So let's say if you saw something like 0.6, 0.7, that's where you'll see that, okay, this tweet might be a little toxic, and then you can then take action based on that, right? So Twitter API has functionality to hide replies. So if somebody was replying to that tweet, you could actually automatically, programmatically, based on this like detection of like insult, profanity, toxicity, whatever it might be, you can actually hide replies to those and take actions on those. Actually, some apps like these do exist. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Block Party app. So Block Party app is similar. You authenticate with Twitter, and once you've authenticated, what it'll do is it'll go through your timeline. It'll identify any like harassment behavior, and it automatically like either blocks or hides replies and things like that. It's called Block Party. Definitely check it out. So it's similar concept where they're using a some algorithm to detect this type of like toxic behavior, and then they'll take action on. So basically, to improve the experience of a user in social media. So I'll pause. I can stop there. So I hope that you now have a good understanding of how to use the Twitter API v2 for academic research. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to us on the Twitter community forums or DMing us on Twitter Dev. Thank you for watching this video.